Hi, welcome to What the What podcast. I'm Renee. We're moving into pumpkin spice season, and I'm not a fan.
I'm Jeff, also not a fan of pumpkin spice.
And I'm Scott, and I'm not paying Stormy Daniels no matter what. No matter what. I'm just not going to give her any money.
It's all free now.
That's what I was going to say. Okay, you're going to have to edit out all that laughing. So I just did. Okay, so beers. Guys, what's happening with the beers today?
All right, so this is from Mother Road Brewing Company, and I forget where. I think they're out of Phoenix, but let me. I should have looked at this beforehand.
Well,
Flagstaff.
Mother Road is
It
Route
is out of
66.
Flagstaff. It's out of Flagstaff. Yeah.
So Route 66 is the Mother Road, which
Right.
goes through Flagstaff.
Yep.
See how neatly we tied that together? Wasn't that cool?
I did not know that Route 66 was called the Mother Road.
Yeah.
That is interesting. So I have had this beer before. This is a double black IPA. And Renee, if you want to.
Ooh, I like that one. That is stunning. Lost Highway, Mother Road Brewing Company. It's very atmospheric. You get sort of like a dark sunset and some clouds, and
It's kind of scary.
it looks like you might encounter an alien out there.
Yeah,
that
it
you might.
does. It does evoke aliens.
That's beautiful.
It's like a 1930s style beer truck or beer car or something. Definitely harkens back to like Prohibition era.
Yes. Yeah, like you're running your alcohol at night, trying to get it to people.
With headlights illuminating a mysterious figure.
Yeah. Oh, wait, there's a figure on it?
It's like a cactus.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be a
Mysterious
cactus.
figure of a cactus.
That cactus is up to no good.
And in the background, I'm out of it tonight. What is the Mogollon Rim?
Oh,
Looks
you
like
can
that's
tell?
what's in the background. Yeah.
Also, listeners, you may be able to hear, we have a monsoon happening here in Tucson, and it is actually perfectly matched with that beer can. You'll hear some thunder, or we might go up in flames. Who knows what will happen out there? But
Or drown.
yeah, okay,
Right.
try it.
We're on a hill, so we probably won't drown.
Yeah, did you see they're handing out sandbags? Like they're trying to get people sandbags out to. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
For what? Here?
Yeah.
So I have a question about being double black.
Yeah. What does that
I mean,
mean?
isn't black? I mean, really?
There are darker.
How can you be
the
twice
depths
as
of my
black?
soul?
That's true.
Yeah.
I don't actually know what makes it a double black. I would assume, I'm going to guess that it's roasted twice.
Oh.
That the hops and barley are roasted twice, but I could be wrong
I'm
about
still
that.
not buying that it's blacker than black.
How does it taste?
I like it. Yeah, it's it has two things. It has a first thing and a second thing. And the first thing is is pretty attractive, and then the second thing kind of goes like bah, and it's sort of gotcha.
This is the second time I've had it, and this will be the last time. I
No?
forgot. Yeah, it's not my. So there's one thing on the can that's puzzling. So it says pairs with burgers and cheesecake. I call BS on the entire beer sommelier thing of
True.
what beer pairs with what.
And
Especially-
wine, frankly.
I mean, why would we, when Scott can give us it has a and a like the sound review of the beer.
Kind of like R2D2
Yeah.
just drank a beer.
Yeah, and this is an extra large can. It's a full pint. So it's going to be hard. This is going to be a tough one to get
You
through.
are not obligated to drink it, I suppose, because you actually have a backup one, which is
I do.
from
I always
last
have a
week,
backup.
that was still one of my favorites.
The second thing, is it tastes a little burnt.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? Almost like if you started a pot of coffee 3 days ago, and then you drank some of it, and then you started some more coffee in that pot, and then you drank that, and then you waited another day, and you drank what was in the bottom of the pot. Like that's sort of what you get at the end of this. Like it's like toast. It's like the burnt part of toast.
So
You're not selling it very well.
No,
Yeah,
it's like
I
if
like
you
it.
threw up a little in your
I'm
mouth,
okay
you know
with
that
it.
feeling.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like that.
Yeah. Just like that.
All right, good. Well, I mean, don't drink it. Move on. Yeah, I think Jeff's already moved on to the next one. Yeah.
I mean, I will drink it at some point. I have friends that would kill me if I don't, but.
All right. So we are. We don't really have a good segue. Actually, we're just gonna jump into.
No.
Actually, yeah. We're just.
Come on, guys. I mean, we should really work on these segues.
Well, yeah, we should actually.
Please.
It's fine. So okay. So
That was a segue.
that was.
That worked.
Perfect.
I liked it.
Done.
We'll
Let's
do that
replicate
we'll
that
do it
every time.
Like a speed bump.
Yes, exactly.
A dead body. Okay, so this week we're doing something where I'm going to surprise Jeff and Scott with what we're talking about. So they don't know. They're coming in blind. It could be something where it's our best show yet. It could be that we all end up crying or someone overturns the table. I don't know. That could be what happens. But I actually came up with this idea from something that Jeff said a really long time ago. And it was when you were doing the YouTube channel, and it may have been on screen, but I'm pretty sure it was on screen, but it could have been something we talked about afterwards, which was the idea of the male gaze. But what was interesting in that, because I think we were talking about women at the time, about how in the superhero films, the male gaze is really looking at women as a sexual object. And then, but for you, what you brought up, which is something I had never thought of, was this idea too that the male gaze is also turned on other men. And it's meant to be aspirational. That the way that we're talking about framing last time, how a story is framed in superheroes in particular, includes this aspirational aspect for men. So I'm curious about that. What I want to talk about today is the male form in media, and what do we see out there, and then also as men, what is that? What's your relationship to that?
So I actually have a funny anecdote.
Oh, perfect.
We skipped over about that.
We did, yes. We didn't know what it was.
It's really not that funny. It's not an anecdote, but I'll run with it anyways. So I realized doing this photography, the pooled underwater portraits, I do not know how to pose men.
Oh, interesting.
At all. It is I do a pretty decent job of posing women, but when it comes to men, I'm like, look like Jesus. That's the only pose I know how to do.
What's the Jesus pose?
Like on a cross. No, keep in mind I'm doing water portraits,
okay.
so it makes a little more sense in that context. But I'm like, do the Led Zeppelin Swan Song or Jesus or something like that, and I do not know how to pose men.
And why is that? Like,
It's just a different one. I don't spend much time looking at men in that manner, which means I probably do spend a lot of time looking at women in that manner.
Yeah.
But it is a different skill set. Men are portrayed in different ways. Men and women are just portrayed in different ways, and so not having a lot of experience working with men, it's actually a real deficit in my game.
Do you find that to be the same? Like, do you have that experience as well as a photographer?
Yeah, I don't.
He's been doing this forever.
Well, no, but I think it just, you may get that at some point, but I just sort of want to know like what your learning curve was with that.
Yeah, the first time that I engage with somebody, there's, when you talk about posing, there are like a million different things that you could be doing with posing too. Often you just want people to look pretty natural because it's sort of not really about like an interesting pose or something like that. Unlike if you're shooting them underwater, a lot of times you're probably really looking for geometry and kind of how their body plays and stuff like that. So, most of the time, the first thing I want to do is just see how somebody stands. It's like I start looking at them right away. I usually start talking to people. If it's not a model that I have like a lot of time to sort of like work with them to figure out what we're doing, but it's somebody that I'm going to be photographing for some other reason, I spend a lot of time kind of talking to them, and while I'm talking to them, I'm looking them over and kind of figuring like what might they be self-conscious about, making some assumptions. What might they, what parts of their sort of appearance might they like to kind of put forward more and stuff like that. And so I usually think about that. But the thing I think is really interesting is that people sort of intuitively already kind of know that about themselves, and they'll tend to sort of, they kind of favor what they consider at least to be a best look for them. Sometimes that's not always the case, that it is the best look. And sometimes it's up to us to kind of help them find that other way. But I don't consider posing men really much different than posing women in terms of, how I would have somebody sit. If I was working with a model doing fashion, how I would have them sit would be almost identical, but I like that sort of androgynous thing. A lot of times I tell women, it's like, sit like a guy, act like a guy. And then all of a sudden, like, their body does change when they do that. They kind of lean in a little bit more, their lip curls, So it does kind of change how they think when I say try to kind of emulate that. And
Right,
I might
but-
tell a man to be a little more feminine in this.
That was
just
about to
cool
ask.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I mean, if it's a model, basically you're looking to get some kind of result. So asking them to do that is totally within the realm of doable. And if they're good at it, they should get it and be able to just kind of get to that right away.
Well, but you're not always working with models, right? Like,
Right,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And also, I mean, just there might be certain poses you would never put a man in. Like, there's been a couple of you wouldn't laying on his stomach, with his hands on his arms.
I'm not going to do that
gazing
with
at
a woman either,
Well,
because it's
true.
so cliche.
Well,
you might
just
get
because
there
it's cliche?
accidentally sometimes, and it might be a decent shot. But yeah, I probably wouldn't start with something like that anyways.
So as you're posing, you don't think this is male or female,
Right, but also Scott, you do a different. Your model of photography is a lot different than your style is counter to the mainstream. When you're for somebody that's
Mm-hmm.
making their living doing senior photos, you almost have to deliver
Yes,
what the people
yes.
expect.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, you're not going to put the senior guy laying down on his stomach, even on he's on the beach with his hands up
Right.
and his legs kicked back. You just wouldn't do that.
right. So going back to the actual question of the male gaze, this was a fun detour, but one of the issues was talking about this is. And it does go to the tropes of how you pose a male or a female, but just when we talk about males as aspirational figures in media, you have to kind of define what the male characteristics are that are being portrayed, and that's kind of a third rail, because even if we talk about what these characteristics are, we all intuitively know that they're not just specifically male. So for example, things like courage.
I'm talking about male body, not characters, body. That's what I
okay.
want.
Okay.
The male form, male human body. If we look at Captain America, who it was Winter Soldier, right? And he has that one scene where he is holding that helicopter and he's holding onto the launch pad, and that turned it it was called bicep porn. It
Right.
was so. It was very, what's interesting, because as a female consumer, right, I have an experience with that, which is very pleasant. But what is your experience of that and maybe less, I kind of feel like I already know what you're going to say, but what is your experience of that as a man?
So quick editor's note, that was Civil War. Not Winter
Civil War,
Soldier.
yeah, sorry.
Not Winter Soldier.
Really? That was
Yeah, it was
Civil War?
It was as Bucky was escaping through the building, and then he got in the helicopter, and then they both went into the river.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I defer to you. You're the expert on that. Yeah.
Anyways,
For me, if I'm watching a movie or TV show or something like that, to me, the portrayal of a woman or a man in a kind of sexualized situation, which I have no problem with if it's done in a way that that kind of makes sense with the story, or the narrative or the art or whatever it is, that's totally fine. I have almost no difference in reaction, oddly enough, to a man than I do to a woman when I see that. It's I really like Robert Mapplethorpe's stuff, and he has a lot of homoerotic photography that's really, the homoerotic thing doesn't land for me. But if he was photographing women in the same way, I don't think that I'd have necessarily that kind of feeling, that sort of sexual kind of attraction to the woman in the photo. At that point, they are really being used as it's very sort of interesting and sexual stuff, but I experience this one step back from that. I don't know that model. I don't know the actress. I actually get really annoyed at sex scenes that go on in movies that seem gratuitous. Maybe people get into that stuff, but it does, to me, I'm actually way more at that point interested in the story. If I met the actress in a bar and we had a nice conversation and it was kind of flirty, that would be great. I would love that. That would be so much fun.
Right.
And that would be a totally different experience to me than watching somebody on a flat screen who doesn't know me. I don't know her. And so I don't have the opportunity to like have that kind of almost fantasy about her.
Well, and so let's take women out of it. Don't talk about women. Talk only about men. Because so for me, if I see a beautiful woman on screen, it is fairly clear that is the standard to which I am being judged against.
Mm-hmm.
That is meant for me to be the quote unquote standard. So this idea of seeing like men, for example, this trend within superhero movies where we're seeing really beautiful men, like very beautiful men, and I'm just like, that is a very handsome man. And then until you had talked about it, I had not thought really about whether or not that parallel sort of movement was happening with men.
So one thing that's happening in our culture over the last 5 years is the rise of the incel community. And if you do any kind of reading in the incel community, they're constantly talking about the Chad. And Chad is the perfect male figure.
Is that an acronym for something, or is
no,
the name
Chad?
Chad?
It's the name Chad.
Oh, okay.
And you probably
Chad.
had to explain what incel is, because there are 10% of the people out there who still don't know what that means.
So incel is an abbreviation for involuntary celibate. It's males who basically men who can't get laid. And now through things like Reddit and 4chan and 8chan have developed this culture where they bond and talk about why they can't get laid.
Which is always not their fault.
Correct. Well, in a perverse way, they so in talking about the Chad, who's always like the captain of the football team, the most handsome person in school, the person with the perfect chin, the perfect nose. Any reading about the incel community, you'll see over and over and over again, they're comparing themselves to these Chads.
Yeah.
And they'll post pictures of themselves where people are ripping on where people rip on how they look, and that validates their whole world concept of why they're not getting laid.
Really?
That if they just had a different nose, or if they had a different chin, then women would stop rejecting them. And it goes so. When we talk about it from a female perspective, you can go back to the 80s and the plethora of, movie of the week where a woman had an eating disorder, and it was all blamed on the model culture, and women's bodies were being portrayed as objects, and it was having this effect on women. And what people missed was the exact same thing was happening with men. But because men aren't allowed to talk about their feelings or their emotions, it was all kind of buried and hidden.
I know for me that, like, if there are a few guys out there that I would consider for me to be like kind of aspirational. I'm super happy with myself. I'll just say that I am.
That was going to be my guess about what you're.
And believe me, I'm 57 years old, so I've been thinner in my life, and but I look at Brad Pitt, I look at George Clooney, and I don't. Any number of other guys that I'll see. I saw a play the 2 nights ago where the main guy, for reasons that made sense to the play, had his shirt off for a lot of the play. He's a college student, and I'm going, well, look, he's a little on the thin side, but he's pretty fucking ripped,
Yeah.
And so there's a twinge for me that it's like, it's like, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind having that sort of that persona, But it doesn't, even though maybe it's true that we're being held up against that in some sort of way, I don't think it's, and I'm only guessing, and I may be wrong, I just don't think it's as insidious for men as it is for women.
I don't know about that. I really think that is a hidden, and I think it's maybe generational, but like you didn't grow up with Captain America or Jason Momoa. Like, that was not, like, you had George Clooney.
Hey, but I grew up with Magnum PI, so.
That explains your facial hair. But, because you nodded when I said that as well. So what's your take? Like, it is insidious. Like.
Yeah, no, it is insidious. And really, when you start looking at, like, the toxic masculinity and the culture of toxic masculinity, I believe there is a through line. There is, you can look at the way things are portrayed in media and the effect it has on the culture. And there is a feedback loop. The people that are producing this media come from our culture. the part of it being a feedback loop is that it is going both ways. So if you look at a movie like Rocky, the original Rocky,
Right. Yeah, we were just talking about that at dinner.
well, we were talking about Rambo.
Potato.
Yeah.
A Stallone movie
Okay.
that starts with R.
But if you
Right, yeah.
but if you look at the original Rocky, and this is something I did a review on at the very very beginning of the Bandwagon Fans channel, and then I was like, I don't want to talk about classic movies because it's really hard to go back and look at classic movies through a modern lens.
Yeah, very difficult.
Particularly, there's one scene where Rambo, you got me doing it now.
Yep.
You know, there's the really famous first date scene with Adrian, and it's this really beautiful scene. And then they get back to his apartment, and there comes a point and everything that happens after that point is a sexual assault.
Oh.
However, so basically she tries to leave and he blocks her exit.
Oh.
And once that happens, everything after that is a sexual assault. That's the rule. Somebody just knocked on.
No, that was sounded like some gun
Interesting.
fire.
All right, so now
This might turn into a horror film.
yeah,
We're in a very
Somebody
small
just
room,
knocked
everybody.
on our window.
I'm
No.
pretty
It's
sure
a dark and stormy night.
That was
Somebody knocked right behind me.
Yeah, it's probably Waylon. Anyways, and there's lightning going on.
oh my gosh, it's so creepy.
It's not even October yet,
Oh god. Okay, yes.
but this is pretty interesting.
I did see a guy in like a burlap
Yeah.
head mask.
Anyway.
That wouldn't be a problem, would it?
I mean, it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, it's fine.
That's my boyfriend.
Somebody always says it's fine. Are you going to be the one that says it's fine?
No, I'm going to be the one to make sure we don't split up. Okay.
Well, I'm just going to go check.
Yes. So back to our regular scheduled programming.
Yeah.
So anyway, this scene has been presented for decades as like the archetype of how men are supposed to behave.
Ah.
Men are supposed to be the aggressor. They're supposed to pursue the woman. Women are demure. There's the whole scene in Swingers where they're describing women as frightened little bunnies, and that you have to go out. You can't be scared of the little bunny. You have to go kill the little bunny, and that comes straight out of stuff like the original Rocky movie, and that. So when and all these decades, you think about not Casablanca, but Gone with the Wind, where he smacks. I'm saying he smacks her because I never saw it. I don't really care what their names are. But there's a whole host
That
of
would
movies.
be Rhett and Scarlet.
Yeah.
That's right.
So there's a whole host of movies of men hitting women to keep them in line, or men pursuing women. This was men being presented as aspirational, as how men are supposed to be.
Right.
And yeah, that's absolutely had a pernicious effect on the culture.
Well, but something else shifted then too, because if we look just at the superhero phenomena right now, let's put DC aside. That's a whole different.
DC is put DC aside.
Yes,
so.
exactly. There is something where the men themselves are honorable, but they also look really good. Like, it is not like, who is Sylvester Stallone? That guy, I wouldn't, even back then wasn't that attractive to me. But the men now are portrayed very differently. So like Captain America is like a paragon of like virtue. He would never do that to a woman, but he looks very good, right? So there's been a shift. And I don't know if it just happened with the superhero movies, but something shifted with that. And, Jason Momoa recently, off screen was shown with just a little bit of some stomach, right? Like he'd kind of like taken a breath, and he was getting torn apart on social media because he'd, softened up a little bit.
Yeah. So, you look at like Chris Evans, who plays Captain America, and the amount of work that he's had to do over the last 10 years to be able to do the bicep porn. And you can't blame him. He's like, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't.
It's too much.
Yeah,
it's not natural because that body type isn't actually natural. It's not sustainable. It's not natural unless you have a full. And even if you do have a full-time coach and a chef, you shouldn't that's not necessarily where you should be as a human, operating out of. But to that question, yeah, it is quite a storm here, guys. Highlighting my points exactly.
And Anna might be going deaf now from wearing the headphones.
Are you picking all that up, Anna?
All right, so real quick,
yes.
for those of you that, if you don't hear anything, trust us, there is a massive storm going on.
I know, wouldn't that be sad if there was
It may or may not
nothing?
be being picked up on the mics, but we can definitely hear
Oh,
it.
it's definitely being picked up on the mics.
You know?
Yeah, because if not, we'll just put it in as a sound effect.
Oh, yeah.
Effect.
Oh, that's great. But so here's my question though. Do you personally, you're saying no, like you don't necessarily, but do you personally experience any, even if it's a twinge of that aspirational sort of disappointment, like the analysis of the gap of where this is where I'm quote unquote supposed to be versus where I am?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah. See,
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely.
Man.
Yeah, I don't. And I don't know if it's just, I mean, it might be generational a little bit. But I think when I was younger, so I'm trying to kind of put myself back into my head of the, when I was in my 20s and my 30s, that, again, I might have sort of aspired to that, but I also knew that I wasn't willing to put the work into it. And I was also, the other thing for me, I mean, having done the kind of work that I've done over a long period of time, I mean, sorry to actor friends out there, but, we often considered actors to be kind of meat puppets. Like, we're literally like, stand here, look like this. And I'm not denigrating what they do at all. I say that to kind of make a point. But it's enough that, like, I could look at, say, a, like, what would be considered, like, seriously beautiful, like, classically just knockout woman or man, and think about them as, like, oh, they'll be great for this thing that we're doing.
Mm.
And know that, like, I have my place in that thing too,
Right.
which is different than what theirs is. So my goal and my role is not to go to the gym every day, and I did not intuit that my role was to go to the gym every day and try to pump up and look like those people. And I wouldn't want to do the work, that much work, like to take care of myself, but I don't want to do that much work. And so I never felt like looking at them like I was looking at a mirror that was reflecting back on myself poorly.
Hashtag blessed right there. I mean, I cannot fathom that, having that sort of relationship with the media, to just look and feel like it's all right. It's not bad. But, also the different experience too of like what I was also thinking about this personally for myself was separate from being a woman, because, we've covered that topic before. I was, I don't even remember what year it is because I'm very bad with time. We were watching the television, so I had a bunch of group of friends. We would go every Thursday. We would cook food together. It was a great meal. And then we would watch So You Think You Can Dance, right? And we'd watch it and we'd say like, oh, we're rooting for this person. We're rooting for this person. And there was one season where one of the contestants, her name was Sabra, had curly hair. And I was mind blown that I was seeing someone with curly hair. And every week I got to watch her dance, and I loved her dancing. But let me tell you, I loved her hair even more because I was in my mid-20s and had not seen someone with curly hair on TV in any way that felt meaningful. And she appeared mixed race, which was also me. And in fact, after that, I started the mixed race photo project that I did for about a year, just to be like, are there other people of mixed race out there and I can photograph them? So like seeing oneself is another side of this, like a different experience of like when you look at film, photography, seeing your own, whether it's not just gender, but like something about yourself reflected back. I mean, you've got your facial hair, so you've got what was you saying, Tom Selleck? No, who was the person you were talking about earlier?
Tom Selleck?
Yeah. Was it Tom Selleck?
Magnum PI.
Magnum PI was Tom Selleck, yeah. But do you, like, where was that for you when either of you saw yourself reflected back? And it could be that it came much earlier. I would hope it came much earlier.
I'm a white dude, so
Yes.
I mean, I saw myself reflected back when I was 2.
That's true.
And
Yes.
I could look at a TV, and I understand that is not the experience that everybody has, but it was the experience
Sure.
that I had all along.
I mean,
and that
it's very
probably
lucky.
plays into some of that, like not being like not feeling either sort of threatened or uncomfortable with what other people did or said or looked like, or it just didn't really happen.
What about for you?
I mean, well, and on one level, yeah. I mean, turn on anything when I was growing up, and it was somebody that looked somewhat like me. But I think what you're getting is where I actually felt like a connection, where I felt like that person could be me.
Yes. Yeah. Something of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to my childhood, I mean, John Ritter on Three's Company.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why? That's interesting.
He was a white male, and with brown hair, short brown hair.
Oh, gotcha.
I kind of looked like him when I was a kid.
And you
Yeah.
totally wanted to live in the apartment.
Yeah. I mean, I love John. I rooted. So there were a couple like early '80s made-for-TV movies, and I actually might just be making this up. It might just be a fantasy, where it was. I think John Ritter starred in like a TV movie with Nancy McKeon, who played Joe on Facts of Life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I so wanted them to get together.
Oh.
Because I wanted to get together with Nancy McKeon.
Right,
I had
sure.
a huge crush on her. And so seeing John Ritter hook up with her, I was like, I really like fantasized about them having a real life marriage. Like Luke and Laura, but real life.
You know,
You're shipping them.
one place where it did that, an aspirational thing that is really kind of funny, and I will even sort of dig into some deep psychology here and say that even now I look at it sometimes and think that I feel like a little kind of a twinge is the alter ego of the heavy metal rock bands, because I was a pretty straight kid, and I looked at them, and particularly with the women, the groupies and stuff like that, and I think for me that was way more of a fantasy to be like one of those guys in one of those bands, and like to be that cool, because I knew I would never be that cool. And so I can understand that, but that wasn't. I mean, most of those guys looked like they were run over by a truck. So that
Right.
wasn't. As
So it
much
wasn't
of a
about-
physical
Correct.
thing,
Yes. Yeah.
but it was more of sort of what kind of
Life.
the sort of aura and the
Yeah.
life that they had that I knew would not have been appealing to me. Like I know, like I would never have been a person to live that kind of life, but the idea of it, Tommy Lee, that was like really kind of oddly and sort of frighteningly appealing to me.
I love this idea of you being such a sensible, like, young person, that you like did this mathematics. You're like, I'm not working out. I don't want to be that person. That's kind of interesting.
So you Scott, you made me think about something that Renee had asked earlier about kind of like our own personal experiences. And I think one of the biggest differences between me and Scott is, Scott, you grew up with a father.
I did.
Who and we never got to meet him, unfortunately, but from what you've described him as, he was pretty confident in himself and self-assured, colonel in the Navy, or captain in the Navy Reserves,
Lieutenant commander.
Oh.
Okay.
Commander in the reserve.
Well, shit.
Yeah, don't get it wrong in case he's listening.
But also,
Well, I actually promoted him. I
Okay.
actually gave him like 3
Oh,
promotions.
you made him a
so-
colonel?
Oh, you did.
Well, in the Navy, a captain is the equivalent of an Army colonel.
Oh, gotcha.
So I actually did right by him.
All right.
And whereas I barely knew my dad, and I was raised by a batshit crazy mom, so of course I don't have any confidence. I say that because I don't think it's necessarily generational. I think it's more.
Something
I think
else.
it's more of an individual. The only difference in my generation in particular was known as the latchkey generation. 'Cause it was really the first generation where it became culturally acceptable for mothers to just let their kids go home
free
alone.
range parenting.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, I remember all the PSAs about latchkey kids, and I was
Yes.
like, oh, that's what I am.
You're like, that's when you actually saw yourself.
Yeah.
You were like, oh, that's me right
I was
there.
definitely a latchkey kid, and most of the kids in my trailer park were latchkey kids in one way or another.
That was probably an after-school special at some point. A latchkey kid that
Yeah, it
starts
was.
smoking pot, does heroin, and commits suicide
Yes.
in an hour.
Yeah, and I don't think that term existed before 1980 or so.
Yeah.
it just didn't exist as a concept.
Right.
I did come home quite a bit earlier than my parents, just in sort of a weird, because when my dad was a cop, he worked a weird shift, and my mom would know it. So I had about an hour where, for a couple years there, I was a big Guiding Light fan.
Really?
Yeah, really. Yeah, because what are you going to do? Homework? I don't think so. So, come home, flip on the Guiding Light.
That sounds.
Terrible.
Horrible.
It
sounds
does not.
horrible.
It was not fun. But you only had an hour of it.
Yeah, only an hour.
That's not too bad.
And I know because of my mother's soap opera watching schedule that he's right about what show it would have been. Because Guiding Light was always the third show. It was the afternoon soap opera. Days of Our Lives was always at like 10 o'clock or 11, depending on daylight savings time.
Really?
Guiding Light, I think it was on CBS, and it was always the last show of the day.
So both of you have
Going up against General Hospital.
wow, soap opera experience then.
Oh, my childhood was dominated by tennis and soap operas. It was
Tennis?
freaking horrible. Yeah, I come from a tennis family.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I bet that if you polled kids or polled adults, you'd find out that a lot of them spent some sort of part of their grade school or junior high days coming home and watching soap operas because there weren't a lot of other kids that were really close in my neighborhood, so like that's what there was to do when I got home for about an hour. Yeah.
How was that? Was that any of that aspirational?
No.
Yeah, it inspired me to not ever do that.
to be in a soap opera?
Yeah. But let's turn it back on you. So when you're watching movies, how do you view the male body?
You know,
What turns you on, Renee?
well, I have some sample pictures here I've actually brought that are gonna. No, it is very interesting because I personally have noticed a shift where a lot of times in earlier media, the woman's form was revealed. And there's been sort of an equal opportunity movement. Michael Fassbender's like, show my butt, show my dick. You know what I mean? It was kind of like, men get to be naked on screen as well. And since Michael Fassbender's my favorite, I also support that idea, right? But that shift has happened fairly recently, where the male form was sort of put up there as something. And I know that this is one of those statements you sort of like realize later is you can get attacked really easily for. But I kind of understand what happened, what men like having an attractive we want to look at attractive people. Like babies will look longer at an attractive person. There's something about attractive people. There's a reason there's an attractiveness bubble. Like, you know, like life is easier in many ways for people who are extremely attractive but we feed that. Like I like looking at attractive people. So when you see a very handsome man on screen, I get it. Like I get why we want attractive women. I get why we want J-Lo in that film because she was amazing and beautiful, right? Like, so there's this interesting thing.
She has a great waist to hip ratio.
It's
a perfect 7-to-3 ratio.
Listeners, if Hustler, go see the movie Hustler. It will blow your mind from that fact alone. So what do we sort of do when we what's our responsibility then? Because we all want beautiful people. That's kind of true. How do we make that, how do we as a society get around this idea of framing it as aspirational? Or what's the way that we get at this so that we all can have an experience more like Scott's, where we understand that we have this pleasant relationship with the media, but it doesn't sort of also hurt us at the same time? How do we do that?
I mean, I think that one of the things that we can do is be mindful of the idea that no two people intuit what's attractive in precisely the same way. There have been studies that the more symmetrical a person's face is, maybe the more attractive they'll be.
Jessica Alba is often the example cited for that.
It's just
yeah,
perfect side to side. So and there's all kinds of sexual stuff that we look at and the ways that we look at people's bodies. But if you start from the standpoint that there are differences in what people are attracted to, and then you realize that there's a pretty wide range in there, ultimately, that I think what the responsibility is not to play into the only one idea that we keep sort of going back to and going back to and going back to, and realizing that it's yeah, we want to have attractive characters for a variety of reasons, but there can be a pretty broad range of what it means to be an attractive character. And I notice a lot of times, if I'm watching a TV show or something, very often the person that I'm sort of most attracted to, and by that I may even mean physically attracted to, is not the ingenue. It's not the one that they're putting up as sort of the beautiful, but it's somebody in the circle that I'm wow, yeah, she's really kind of has interesting eyes or an interesting way of sort of moving her head or something like that. And I think if we give more people the opportunity to kind of be the attractive people that they are, and put more of them in the forefront instead of just sticking with that, like, nobody's going to come see this movie if it's not a blonde with a certain waist to hip ratio or J-Lo, then I think maybe if we do that, we'd be doing a service.
So diversify, basically.
Yeah, diversify it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Scott just said. But I also, like, as somebody who, I am typically attracted to that, what I've been taught was attractive since I was a little kid. That's what I still.
I do believe you describe them as bud girls.
Yeah. I was actually just about to. I was just about to say, I still remember the Budweiser posters of the Beach Girls from 1985. And in a lot of ways, I aspire to have that in my life. And I don't want to apologize for that. That's my taste. But Scott's absolutely right. It really just comes down to pushing more different types of people and giving people of different body types and different ethnicities and different hairstyles the chances to be that sex figure, so that people like me aren't taught that there's only one form of beauty. I
just had a thought too. It's funny when you mentioned the posters, because you might have grown up with posters of the Bud Girls, and I had, Debbie Harry, and like mine were the rock and roll, sort of the women of rock and roll, or the young women of rock and roll. Probably some of that stuff is really set when we're pretty young.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I still think the 80s look is the best look on a woman.
You're like,
so I just keep waiting for it to come back. Yeah.
One sleeve off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Although I refused to get into any of the cult followings of men. I refused to put a man. I was like, how dare? Like, I wasn't going to do New Kids on the Block. Wasn't going to do any of that. I had Pat Benatar up there. I'm like the only female rock star I had access to. And I had her poster up because I was like, women can rock too. So I did not have that. Not to say that our templates aren't set really early, right. But I think one of the other things too in this regards is that something that's been, I think, more present for women is that we have had more variety. Like there's all sorts of misanthropes and different types of people, men who exist on the screen and who have different personalities. And I think that's sort of what has been a little bit of missing with the narrative with women, is that so often the only thing we're saying about a woman is that she's attractive, versus seeing women who are complicated or evil or horrible or great or nice, and that there's not enough diversity in not only in representation that way, but also personality wise. And so we don't get to see real people. So like every now and again I was like, wow, this is really gratuitous the way I feel about Jason Momoa. This is kind of gross, but I'm like, but I also will get to see him in not that I have yet actually seen him in any roles that I feel like are really deep, but there's a potential for that, right? That I can see a man in something where I'm like, he plays a misanthrope or he plays the anti-hero, and I can still like him because I have so many things to choose from, right? So I find that that's a little easier, I think, for women, is to say, I can like all different types. You poor men have just been shoehorned into a select few.
Yeah, it actually goes back to what the very beginning of the conversation about posing for men.
Yeah.
Women have, in some ways, a lot more options than men do. In the way they present themselves.
Yes.
In hair color,
yes.
Dress.
Yes.
Men, it's like, you're going to wear a shorts and a shirt, which two of us are, shorts, or slacks and a polo shirt, or jeans and a button-up shirt with a bolo tie. Like there's very little room for men to express themselves without being coded as gay.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, so power to diversity with men too.
One thing that occurs to me is how often we see in the media a portrayal of something that's kind of like based on a true story, or it's supposed to be an accurate depiction. And if you go and you look at the characters, every single one of the characters that they cast is what I would call better looking in a classic sort of way than the real people who were in it. And so it's that sort of idealization of reality that is constantly sort of being put
the shine, put the shine on it. Put
the shine on it. And I think, if we can be, it's funny because if somebody's not sort of classically attracted,
Steve
Buscemi, sort of
Buscemi
played off that they're like, well, I'm thinking like, a character with a minor role. It's usually, somebody who's, redneck, a yokel, something like that, but anybody who has their act together and who has a leading or a supporting role, almost always pretty good looking. And I think that's something that, like, if we had some producers that just said, you know what, let's totally throw that out and let's see who's the best actor. And then let's put them in the roles. And let's not worry about what they look like. It would be interesting to see what would happen to the revenue on these. Would people not watch it because they're attractive, and do we have to go back to that model? I don't know.
Would I love the superhero movies as much if the men weren't as attractive? I do not know. I don't know. I can't. Maybe not.
Yeah, imagine.
I get something out of that, right? Like,
imagine like Wonder Woman in mom jeans. It's just like
you could dress Gal Gadot in anything though, and she would be rocking that.
Well, imagine casting, and this is a dated reference, but imagine casting Roseanne Barr as Wonder Woman.
Right.
It would totally. It would immediately turn into a comedy.
There's just no way. There is an alternate universe maybe where that happened, but not here. Maybe I don't know if I want to see that one. I don't want to go to that alternate universe.
Well,
actually,
I'm glad you surprised us with this topic.
That's right.
We entered the room with fear and trembling.
Oh, they did. They were very
expecting
scared.
gnashing of teeth.
Yes.
And it didn't happen.
It did not.
So that was good.
And we abated the storm. It is still going, but
we did, and the creepy knock on the window from the guy with the burlap thing over his head.
I was a little disturbed. That was a little scary.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So everybody in this room knows that my front door sticks and it's really hard to open. I'm pretty sure it was Waylon just trying to get back in and thinking the door was locked.
Oh, gotcha.
It's understandable.
They always say something like that.
Yeah.
And he's like, and Waylon is the ghost. So.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Waylon, if you want to know who Waylon is, you can go back and look at Bandwagon Fans on YouTube, and he made several appearances there.
There you go.
He's the guy that looks like me with even shorter hair.
Is that possible?
Yes.
Okay. On that note, we're going to just swap Waylon out next time. And we're going to wrap it up. This has been Renee.
We're not going to talk about what we're into.
Oh, we are going to talk about what we're into. I hadn't gone that far. I did all this other work, mental work.
Mine is real short. I've given up on watching anything, so I've just been going back and watching like early 80s crappy fantasy movies.
Like?
Lost Empire.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm talking like everything that we've talked about is objectionable or quasi-objectionable. I'm talking about big boobs, muscular men, crappy acting, like the absolute antithesis of 2019 lefty good social morals. Just absolute crap.
It's like eating junk food. It's like the emotional equivalent of eating junk food.
Oh yeah. This is like a gallon of Ben and Jerry's ice cream that I've just been devouring.
I've been listening to a podcast called Pretend, which for people who are into the sort of true crime podcast, it kind of fits in there, and so there's definitely some of the episodes of it are true crime, but it just looks at a situation, a real situation, and where somebody is being or acting or portraying themselves as something that they are not.
Oh.
And it's really, I quite like it.
Good hosts.
Pretend.
They're not as good as us, but
What's that?
the hosts, are they?
Yeah, it's one dude, and at first I wasn't really even super thrilled with his delivery, but it's kind of grown on me a little bit, and I like it.
I love the idea of
Not
us
nearly as good as us.
No, talking shit about other co-hosts.
Yeah.
Like, just not like,
Yeah,
that guy's a
'cause
drunk.
Other co-hosts suck.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
right.
Of course they do.
I put it off. I generally, some of you may know, no, none of you will know. Some of you listening are my friends. I don't really watch TV wise. It's very difficult for me to watch dramas because I get real anxious about characters. Like if it ends on a cliffhanger and I have to wait a week, I suffer. I have dreams about the characters. I generally just watch comedies. That's usually my go-to. So there's nothing out there right now. It is done. Like I've watched everything, but I'm now going into the second season of Glow, the Glorious Ladies of Wrestling, the TV show on Netflix. Gorgeous
Ladies of Wrestling.
the glorious.
Believe me, 8-year-old Jeff remembers Glow very fondly.
Yeah, it is awesome.
I do too.
It is very depressing in the same way because it's full of misogyny and challenges. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but it's just very charming, very well produced, very well acted. Is just Yeah, it's filling that void right now.
Did you know that Sylvester Stallone's mom was the executive producer of Glow?
Of the TV show Glow?
No, of the actual wrestling production.
Story checks out.
Rivera. They shot it at the Rivera in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Farmer's Daughters, Hollywood.
Nice.
Lady Godiva, Fabulous Moolah was WWF.
And that is going to be its own spin-off podcast.
All right, thanks for listening. That was What the What. You can follow us on social media at WTW Popcast, and that's on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
You can also email us at wtwpopcast@gmail.com.
And I just want to point out to everybody that is Popcast. So we're talking POP cast.
You can also find me on Twitter at Special Feather.
And you can find me on Twitter at the BW Fans and on YouTube, Bandwagon Fans.
And this is Scott. I'm available at Facebook and Instagram as Scott Grissell.
All right, thanks for joining us. This has been What the What. This is Renee.
Jeff.
And Scott?